So in this lecture, we're going to be talking about personal identity. What that is the question about like what makes you you. First, we're going to look at some psychological factors, and then we're also going to look at some physical factors. And then we're going to look at some like combination of those together to try and determine like what criteria we actually use to identify one person from another. But ultimately, like none of these accounts are actually going to be satisfactory, and this is still going to be an open question. We don't know what makes you you. So first we should clarify what we're talking about when we're talking about, what makes you you. What question are we trying to get at? And what we're trying to get at is like, what makes one person at one time the same person at a later time? So for instance, let's say you're over at your friend's house and they show you a picture of a 5-year-old's birthday party, and they point to the picture and they say, "That's me." And now what we're trying to do is come up with an account that explains what makes the person in the photo the exact same person sitting next to you talking to you. So more precisely, we're looking for an account that's able to fill in the following blank. Person A at time t is the same person as person B at time t star, if and only if blank. So what we're looking for is we're looking for an account that's going to be able to tell us like what makes one person at one time, the same person another time. In other words, like what conditions make it the case, or under what circumstances are they the same person or are they not the same person? All right. So before we can actually get into answering that question, we need to set off two clarifications to really help us avoid some confusion here. All right, so the first one is about the word same or similarity or identity or identical. There's a little bit of ambiguity here, which means that there's two or at least more ways of understanding the term. So think about these two cases. I go out and I buy a 2020 Honda Accord Black. And I did all the research and I explained to my sister like, oh, this is an awesome car. This is why I bought it. It's the best car ever. And she's completely convinced. And she goes out and she also buys a black 2020 Honda Accord. All right. So then in the other case, my sister and I drove the same car in high school. So it was a 2001 beige Honda Accord. So there's a difference there between the similarities. So my sister and I, Becky, we drove the same car in high school, but then we also, in another sense, drive the same car now. We both drive 2020 black Honda Accords. So the same in the first sense, the 2020 Honda Accord sense, is going to be qualitatively similar, which means that they have a lot of similar qualities. Now, that could be, color, shape, design, that kind of stuff. The other kind of similarity that we're talking about in the second case is known as numerical identity. So my sister and I drove numerically one and the same car in high school. She actually called it Gary. I didn't. I just called it the car. So the idea is that, like, Gary is the car. Gary is identical to the car. All right, so the same kind of similarity can also like carry over to people. So for instance, we have two twins, identical twins. They are going to be qualitatively identical. They're going to look a lot alike. They're going to talk a lot alike. They probably even think a lot alike. But they're not the exact same person. Whereas in contrast, Marilyn Monroe is numerically identical to Norma Jean Baker. Or Muhammad Ali is Cassius Clay. Or Bob Dylan is Robert Zimmerman. These are just their stage names, or they change their name later in their lives. But these two names are two ways of referring to the exact same thing. So in other words, like Norma Jean Baker is numerically identical to Marilyn Monroe, and Robert Zimmerman is numerically identical to Bob Dylan. But again, like twins, identical twins, they're going to be qualitatively identical, but they're not going to be numerically identical. All right? And so this chapter is focused on numerical identity. what makes one person at one time numerically identical to the person at a later time. So, what makes them one and the same person at a later time. So whenever we talk about similarity or identity in this chapter, we're gonna be talking about numerical identity. If you are thinking about qualitative identity or qualitative similarity, then you're gonna get a little confused and you're not maybe gonna fully grasp the argument going on here. So if we ever are talking about qualitative similarities, which sometimes we also have to talk about, I'm going to just talk about them as being very similar or closely alike or maybe even exactly alike or indistinguishable. But that's not going to mean numerically identical. That just means they look indistinguishable or they look very similar kind of thing. All right, so now you might be thinking, okay, well, I'm clearly not the same kid in the photo, or my friend's not the same person as the photo, because we're different in all sorts of ways. I'm changing every second. I'm not even the same person as I was a second ago. I've lost a couple skin cells along the way. So in that instance, you're confusing qualitatively similar with numerical similarity. You do not have all of the same features as your younger self, but you're still numerically one and the same, right? So, when I was a kid, I played lacrosse, and I like to walk around without shoes and socks on all the time. And now I don't like doing that. I love putting on my shoes when I go outside, and I no longer play lacrosse. We don't have the same qualities as we used to, but yet still I'm numerically one and the same person. Or if we don't have a way of determining that I am, then maybe I'm not. But intuitively, I am still the same person as I was when I was 5, even though I have different preferences, different likes, dislikes, things like that. So the point is that, despite the lack of qualitative similarity, we can still have numerical identity. All right. So the second point of clarification is that we're not just looking for a general rule of thumb about how to tell one person from another. So, for instance, if we just wanted to use a rule of thumb, quite literally, we could look at someone's thumbprint, their fingerprint, and say, oh, they're the same person over time because they have the exact same fingerprint, right? Well, let's consider this case. So now let's consider the case of leave no trace. After leaving the mansion, Becca realizes that she may have left some fingerprints behind. To help ensure that the police cannot prove that she was the burglar, she soaks her fingertips in acid, completely searing off her fingertips. The police track her down, and as she hoped, they were unable to prove that she was the one who committed the burglary. So, Becca, before searing off her fingertips, and Becca searing off her fingertips afterwards, are clearly going to be numerically identically the same person. So, having the same fingertips is just not going to be a good way of telling when someone's numerically identical. So further, a good account of personal identity is going to be able to explain all of the cases, not just the ones that we think are realistic or possible, but even these crazy hypothetical cases. So even if it's never happened before that someone has ever seared off their fingertips, we should still be looking for an account that is. And you might be thinking, well, why is that? Why should we be accounting for these theoretical ones? Well, let's think about if we were to try and define bachelor as, any man, any unmarried man who's under 80 feet tall. It's that's a really weird definition. You seem to be packing more into that definition than is really necessary. But yet it's still true that no bachelor is over 80 feet tall. And that's just because there aren't people who are over 80 feet tall. But still, to get a really good definition of what a bachelor is, I feel we need to get rid of that, extra there. So we need to account for these, theoretical counterexamples. So even though there is no bachelor who's 90 feet tall, we still should not say that, what it is to be a bachelor is to be, an unmarried man under 80 feet tall. So, even though that's only a theoretical case, our definition and account still needs to be, thinking about it and taking it into account and trying to be able to explain it. So again, likewise with, personal identity. Even if, no one has ever actually burned off their fingertips, we still need to be able to account for something like this. We're looking for an account of personal identity that is not going to allow for any exceptions. The theory should be able to account for even these like crazy hypothetical cases. So we're going to separate the major accounts into two types. First, the physical accounts of personal identity, and then we'll look at the psychological accounts of personal identity. So we can start by looking at the account we were just thinking about, the fingertip account. A at time t is the same person as B at t star, if and only if A and B have indistinguishable fingertips. Now, we've already seen that a person with fingertips at one time can still be the same person as a person who's burned off their fingertips at a later time. And so that's going to be a counterexample to this account. Now, theoretically also, we could have, one person graft another person's fingertips onto theirs and then go and commit a crime to try and frame that other person. But still, they're not the same person. Even if they have indistinguishable fingertips, it doesn't mean that they're going to be the same person. All right, so maybe we should look at a person's DNA. Person A and person B are the same if they have the same DNA. This is going to be known as the DNA account. A at T is the same person as B at T star, if and only if A and B have indistinguishable DNA. Now, this account is going to avoid the problems from, leave no trace. That Becca is going to have the same DNA before and after she sheared off her fingertips. So the DNA account is going to say that she's the same person. However, this account is going to have its own problems. Think about identical twins. Identical twins are going to have the exact same DNA, but yet clearly they're different people. And then think about advances in genetics lately with CRISPR, things like that. We could change the DNA in every single one of our cells of our body to help us maybe overcome a disease or something like that, but yet still you can be the same person before and after. So these would be clear counterexamples to the same DNA account. So maybe we should look at something a little bit bigger. Let's think about maybe you're the same person as someone else if you have the exact same body. The same body account says A at T is the same person as B at T star if and only if A has the same body as B. So by body here, what we mean is just more than just the torso, but everything. So the head, the arms, the legs, the feet, the toes, the fingertips, everything is included in your body. But now you might be thinking, well, don't our cells regenerate all the time? Aren't we constantly losing and gaining new cells? And yeah, that's correct. We are doing that, but we still have the same body over the time, right? It's not like as I lose my skin cells on my fingers, I'm not getting a new finger. It's still one and the same finger. I'm not getting a new hand. I don't have a new arm all of a sudden or a new body because I've lost skin cells. All right, so this account is going to be able to avoid some of the problems that the previous two accounts had. So, if two people have indistinguishable DNA or fingertips, or their fingertips have changed over time, it's not going to say that those aren't going to matter because they're still going to say that they have the same body. And so it's going to avoid those problems in those cases. So remember that we're not looking here for a case of qualitatively similarity. Because as our skin cells leave, we're going to be qualitatively different. I have different qualities. I have different skin cells now, right? But what we're looking for here is we're looking for numerical identity. Are they still one and the same person as they gain and lose skin cells? And it seems like, yeah. So that account is going to say, look, they're the same person because they have the same body. So before we can get into the problems with the same body account, let's first turn to some of the psychological accounts that attempt to explain personal identity. So as opposed to looking at physical features that might help us explain personal identity, we can now look at psychological features. So psychological features, by that I mean anything that is included to make up a person's mental life. So their memories, their personality, their likes, their dislikes, their beliefs, emotions, and even their current perceptual states, like what they're seeing or smelling or sounding or how things feel to them. So here's a first pass at how we might be able to formalize the psychological features to account for personal identity. The psychological matching account says A at T is the same person as B at T star if and only if A's psychological features are the exact same as B's psychological features. So this account, off the cuff, is probably going to seem really, really strict. Every second, we're forming new memories. And now you have a new memory of me saying that previous sentence. And so according to this psychological matching account, you and the person before hearing that sentence are different people. And that's just way too strict. So instead, we need to loosen it up. Instead of having the psychological features be the exact same, maybe we could just say that they're mostly the same. So this is the psychological overlap account. A at T is the same person as B at T star if and only if A's psychological features are mostly the same as B's psychological features. All right, so the overlapping account is going to be able to avoid the problems of the matching account. You don't have to have all of the exact same features as the other person. You just have to have most of the same features as the other person. The problem with the overlapping account is that it's not going to be able to explain how you and or your friend and the kid in the photo are going to be the same person. They don't even have most of the same psychological features. So, they have different likes, they have different memories, according to the overlapping account, they're not going to be the same person. So again, we're going to need a slightly more flexible notion. We need something to be able to capture the idea that over a long enough period of time, someone's psychological features might undergo massive change. So although there isn't much overlap between you and the kid in the photo, or your friend and the kid in the photo, there is still a lot of overlap between your friend and your friend a year ago. And then there's also a lot of overlap between your friend a year ago and your friend 2 years ago, and your friend 2 years ago and 3 years ago, and so on and so forth, all the way until we get back to when they were 5 years old. So this idea is to create a chain. Each link in the chain is going to be a snapshot of someone's psychological features. And the links in the chains can be over a year, or really they can be like over any moment of time. They can be moment to moment. Those would be like little small links in the chain. So what that is to say that the person who is at the earlier side of the chain is going to be a psychological ancestor of the person at the later side of the chain. And the person at the later time is going to be a psychological descendant of that ancestor. So this is going to give us the psychological descendant account. A at T is the same person as B at T star if and only if A is either a psychological ancestor or a psychological descendant of B. All right, so this seems to give us all the right answers in the cases that we're considering. Your friend is a psychological descendant of the kid in the photo. And Becca is the same person even though she's had her fingertips sheared off. She was a psychological descendant of the person who robbed the mansion. So now we have two accounts. We have the same body account and we have the psychological descendant account. So these seem both like promising answers, and in the next couple segments we're actually going to show how they're deeply flawed, and this question is still going to remain open, like what makes you you? So according to the same body account, having the same body is going to be sufficient for being the same person, which means that if they have the same body, then they are the same person. But furthermore, having the same body, according to the same body account, having the same body is going to be necessary for being the same person. So again, like we had the if and only if, and that's going to say it's necessary and sufficient. And so being necessary means that if they do have, or if they are the same person, then they do have the same body. All right, so in this segment, I'm going to argue against this view with two arguments. The first one, from the actual case of conjoined twins, is going to show us that this account's not going to be sufficient. And then we're going to propose a hypothetical case of people swapping bodies like Freaky Friday, and that's going to show us that this account is not necessary either. But before we go on, we should set aside cases of like associated or dissociative identity disorder. So these are cases, more commonly known as like multiple personality disorder. So you might think that, this is an instance where there are multiple people within one body, but that's not clearly what's going on here. Another way of thinking about what's going on in multiple personality disorder is There's one single person, but they have a highly disunified mind, which means that there's a single person who feels and acts dramatically different from time to time, but they're still the same person. For us to really know what's going on here, we would probably have to know what's going on inside of the mind of a person with this disorder for us to really know if this could be used as a counterexample against this account. But since we don't really know, let's just set those accounts aside and let's think about the ones that we do know more about. So the first objection we're going to consider to the same body account, it comes from a real case of Abby and Brittany Herschel of Minnesota. So they are dicephalitic parapragus twins, which is just the scientific or Latin word for meaning that they have two heads but the same torso. So they're alive and well. They're currently 32 years old, and last time I checked, they were working as school teachers in Minnesota. And we might naturally describe Abby and Brittany as two people sharing the same body. So using this real-world example, we can construct the following objection: the conjoined twins argument. CT1 says if the same body account were true, then either Abby and Brittany have different bodies, or Abby and Brittany are the same person. CT2, Abby and Brittany have the same body. CT3, Abby and Brittany are not the same person. CT4, so the same body account is false. So CT1 is just the implication of the same body account. If the same body account is true, then Abby and Brittany are either two different people with two different bodies, or they are the same person with the same body. And this account is just going to say that those are our only two options. So CT2 also seems to be true. There seem to be like a single two-headed organism there. Anecdotally, there is a popular documentary about Abby and Brittany, and it's titled The Twins Who Share a Body. So CT3 also seems to be true. Abby and Brittany do seem to be different people. They seem to have different preferences, they excel in different subjects in school, and anecdotally, you probably were not bothered when I keep calling them they as opposed to she, which is going to suggest that you also agree that they are different people. You would also agree there with CT3. So you might contend that they actually have two different bodies, right? Abby's body consists of the right arm, the right leg, the right lung, and the right head, the one that says, "Hi, my name is Abby." And on the other side, you might say that Brittany's body consists of the left arm, the left leg, the left lung, and the left head. But this sounds really implausible. So for starters, this would say that Brittany has no liver, since it's on the right side of the body. But rather, it sounds like it's better to say that the twins are going to share the liver. But then further, when we look at other two-headed organisms, this happens in nature with snakes and turtles, we talk as if there's only one two-headed animal there. To be consistent, we should say the same thing about human animals. So the point is not to say that they are the same person, but the point is to say that there are two persons who share the same body, which is exactly what CT3 is going to say. So alternatively, one might try and reject CT3 by claiming that Brittany and Abby are the same person. But you might be thinking about something like the split personality disorder from earlier. They have a highly disunified mind who behaves in different ways. But that would just create these weird contradictories out of their two mouths. So to see this, let's consider the following case. Conjoined drama. Abby is dating Ari, and Abby's conjoined twin, Brittany, is secretly in love with Ari and has always been jealous of their relationship. One night while Abby is sleeping, Brittany confesses her feelings to Ari, and Ari kisses her. Later, Abby finds out, and she strangles Brittany. It seems natural to say that Ari cheated on Abby, and then Abby turned around and killed Brittany. But someone who's going to deny CT3 is going to have to say that that's an inaccurate description. Instead, they're going to have to say something like, since Abby and Brittany are the same person, Ari did not actually cheat on Abby. And further, Abby did not kill Brittany. Rather, what she did was she strangled herself, but then survived, albeit with one less head. Now, that doesn't really seem to be an acceptable description of CT3, and instead I think we should accept CT3 as true. Right now, here's our first chance to stop and reflect. Can you defend the same body account against the conjoined twins argument from this segment? So the second argument against the same body account is going to come from John Locke's essay concerning human understanding. Or maybe you're more familiar with it from the Disneyfied version of like Freaky Friday, but there's been a lot of them. There's another one in Futurama where they did something like this. And although nothing like this could probably ever happen, again, we're looking for a theory of personal identity that does not allow for exceptions. So we need to even be able to explain some of these weird hypothetical cases. So let's turn to one of those weird hypothetical cases. The case of the body swap. Rachel is a neurotechnologist using fMRI and supercomputers and advanced laser technologies. She has devised a way to get a complete neuron for neuron scan of one's brain and then rewire a second person's brain to be an exact duplicate of it. She recruits a pair of volunteers to have their wiring swapped for a day. A man named Raul and a woman named June. Rachel's team performs the procedure on Tuesday night, and the volunteers awake Wednesday morning. Both stare down at their bodies in disbelief. The person with the male body says, "My name is June," and can recount all of June's memories, but knows nothing about Raul's past. The person with the female body says, "My name is Raul," and can recount all of Raul's past, but nothing about June's. So it seems natural to say that June and Raul swapped bodies. June is the one in the male body and Raul is the one in the female body after the procedure. Alternatively, one might say that June is still in the female body and Raul is in the male body, but they've just lost their minds. June mistakenly thinks that her name is Raul and can't remember any of the things that she's done. But that seems like a really absurd way to interpret this case. Rather, it seems clear that the two people have swapped bodies. So to help us be clear about this, we're going to call the person with the male body on Tuesday, male T, and the person with the female body on Tuesday, female T. And also the person with the male body on Wednesday, male W, and the person with the female body on Wednesday, female W. So with that in mind, now we can present the body swap argument. So the body swap argument says, BS1, male T and male W have the same body. BS2, if male T and male W have the same body, then if the same body account is true, then male T and male W are the same person. BS3, male T and male W are not the same person. BS4, so the same body account is false. So BG1 here is just saying that the body that came in on Tuesday is the same body that left on Wednesday. Granted, the rewiring and the procedure probably changed some things around in their body chemistry, but that doesn't mean that it's not the same body. Remember what we said about a person who genetically altered their DNA with CRISPR. It's still clearly going to be the same body. BS2 is just reporting the implications of the same body account. Having the same body is sufficient for being the same person. BS3 is just saying what we think is obvious about what's happening in the Freaky Friday case. So the same body account is going to get this wrong. It's going to say that male T and male W are the same person. And it's wrong to say that male T, the one calling himself Raul on Tuesday, and female W, the one insisting that he's Raul on Wednesday, are different people. So these two wrong implications of the same body account are reasons that we should reject the same body account. So then in contrast, we have this psychological descendant account. It seems to be getting this one right. It says that the female W is a psychological descendant of male T. There is massive psychological overlap between the features of the person who woke up in the female body on Wednesday and the person who walked into the clinic in the male body on Tuesday. Further, it says that male T and male W are not the same person because there is no overlap between them. All right, so getting one of these cases is wrong is going to be enough to say that the same body account is false. But getting one of these cases right is not going to be enough to say that the psychological descendant account is true. So now we're going to turn to the psychological descendant account to see if this one's going to work to explain personal identity. Spoiler alerts, it's going to have its own problems. All right, here's another chance for us to stop and reflect. Would the same brain account be an improvement on the same body account? Why or why not? So now we're going to consider some arguments against the psychological continuity account. Again, the psychological continuity account says that A and B are the same person if and only if one's a psychological descendant of the other. So one way of pushing back against the psychological continuity account is to look at cases that involve dramatic psychological discontinuity. In other words, a break in the chain. So first, let's consider this case, total amnesia. Jia Wu is stranded on a desert island. Adding injury to insult, a coconut falls on Jia Wu's head at noon today, instantly resulting in total amnesia. She can't remember how she got to the island or anything else about her past. She can't even remember her own name. So notice that the non-amnesiac, the person before the coconut fell on their head, has totally different psychological features than the amnesiac, the person who's had the coconut fall on their head. So according to the psychological continuity account, the psychological descendant account, the non-amnesiac and the amnesiac are going to be different people. Yet clearly it seems that they're the same person. It's not as though the coconut killed Jia Wu, but rather Jia Wu is the only person on the island. There's only one person there, and we would all agree that it's Jia Wu. Total amnesia is supposed to be a counterexample to the psychological descendant account, but one might claim that the non-amnesiac has significant overlap with the amnesiac. Now, what you're saying there is like the idea is like they don't have the same memories, but maybe they have a lot of overlap. So similar hobbies, similar interests, they have similar temperaments, likes and dislikes, and so on and so forth. So the idea is that like even though they don't have the same memories, there still has enough remaining overlap between them to say that they're the same person. So let's modify that case a little bit, and now maybe we can generate a counterexample to the psychological descendant account. So let's look at the Blackout case. Minjun is stranded on a desert island. Adding insult to injury, a coconut falls on Minjun's head at noon today, temporarily knocking him unconscious. While unconscious, he's not dreaming, nor does he have any thoughts or experiences or any physical sensations whatsoever. He is completely blacked out. When he finally awakens hours later, he will feel as though no time has passed. So we can use this case to formalize an argument against the psychological descendant account, the Blackout argument. BL1 says the unconscious man is not a psychological descendant of the conscious man. BL2, if the unconscious man is not a psychological descendant of the conscious man, then if the psychological descendant account is true, then the conscious man is not the same person as the unconscious man. BL3, the conscious man is not the same person as the unconscious man. So BL4, the psychological descendant account is false. So the idea is that the conscious person has a lively psychological life, but the man who's blacked out has nothing psychologically going on, which tells us that there is no psychological overlap, which is exactly what BL1 is saying, that the latter is not a psychological descendant of the former. Now, BL2 is an implication that the psychological descendant account says. To be the same person on this account, one must be a psychological descendant of the other. Now, BL3 seems obviously true. If someone saw him lying on the ground unconscious, it would be right for them to say that, yeah, that's the same person that they saw wandering around the island earlier. Alright, another chance for us to stop and reflect. Can the psychological descendant account be defended against the Blackout argument? If so, how? Alright, so now we can turn to the second argument against the psychological descendant account. We're going to need the help of our neurotechnician again, Rachel. So let's consider the double trouble case. Rachel's rewiring program has been tremendously successful, and she's now performing dozens of body swaps a day. But she's starting to get a little sloppy. Today, after rewiring Chad's brain to duplicate JoJo's, Rachel then accidentally rewired Alex's brain to duplicate JoJo's as well. As a result, both the person with Chad's original body and the person with Alex's original body wake up and say, "My name is JoJo." Both can tell you about JoJo's past. Neither can tell you anything about Chad or Alex's past. Rachel's team also accidentally obliterates JoJo's original body. So, figuratively speaking, JoJo's brain has fissioned here. Fission just is the opposite of fusion. So, fusion means come together, fission means separate apart. Like an amoeba, or how like cells divide. But how would we describe this procedure? In other words, the question is, which one of them is JoJo? Honestly, I'm not sure, but I am sure that the psychological descendant account is going to give us an incoherent response. They're going to say that both are JoJo, and that is probably going to be incorrect. It doesn't really make sense to say that both are JoJo. Again, it's going to be helpful if we're clear about who we're talking about. So let's use Chad RW to refer to the person with the rewired brain in Chad's original body, and Alex RW to refer to the person with the rewired brain in Alex's original body. Alright, so with that in mind, now let's consider the fission argument. FS1. If the psychological descendant account is true, then JoJo is the same person as Chad RW and the same person as Alex RW. FS2. If JoJo is the same person as Chad RW and the same person as Alex RW, then Chad RW is the same person as Alex RW. FS3, so if the psychological descendant account is true, then Chad RW is the same person as Alex RW. FS4, Chad RW is not the same person as Alex RW. FS5, so the psychological descendant account is false. So let's take this one premise at a time. First, FS1. When Chad RW and Alex RW wake up in the lab, their mental states are going to be virtually indistinguishable from JoJo's. But as soon as they wake up, they're going to start diverging from one another, but nonetheless, they're still psychological descendants of JoJo. After all, they have massive psychological overlap with her. And that's all we need for FS1. So FS2 is going to come from the logical principle of transitivity. This is the idea that if A is identical to B, and B is identical to C, then we know that A is identical to C. So again, this is supposed to be numerical identities. So let's go back to our number example. We knew that 2 squared is identical to 4, right? Well, we also know that 4 is identical to the square root of 16. So that tells us that we can know that 2 squared is identical to the square root of 16. So the same can also be said for people. Tom Cruise is the actor who plays Ethan Hunt in the Mission Impossible movies. And he's also the actor who plays Maverick in the Top Gun movie. Since we know that, we don't have to wonder whether the actor who plays Maverick and the actor who plays Ethan Hunt is the same person, because we already know that by the principle of transitivity that they are the same person. So it's also true in this case. If Chad RW is identical to JoJo, and JoJo is identical to Alex RW, then we know that Chad RW is identical to Alex RW. So FS4 is motivated by a different logical principle, the no difference principle, or NDP for short. NDP says if A is numerically the same as B, then at any given time, anything that's true of A is also going to be true of B at that time. So to illustrate this point, think about Bob Dylan and Robert Zimmerman. If you didn't know, Bob Dylan's stage name, Bob Dylan is Robert Zimmerman's stage name. So they're just two names picking out the exact same person. So Bob Dylan, we also know, won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016. So by the no difference principle, it's also true that Robert Zimmerman won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2016. And that's how it should be. It would be really strange to say that Robert Zimmerman did not win the Nobel Prize in Literature. There's only one person, and either he won the Nobel Prize or he didn't win the Nobel Prize. So the principle can also be used to tell us if two people are the same person. So the idea is like, if you can find one single difference between A and B, then you know that A is not numerically identical to B. So if you're wondering whether Emily and Haley are the same person, all you need to do is just look at their list of properties. And if you notice that one of them is skydiving and the other one is not skydiving, then boom, there you have it. They're not the same person. So now we can apply NDP to the current case. If you're wondering whether Chad RW and Alex RW are the same person, we need to just look at their properties. Notice that Chad RW is currently walking down the street and Alex RW is still in the lab staring up at the ceiling. No one person can be walking down the street and not walking down the street at the same time. And so by NDP, we know that they cannot be the same person, which is what FS4 is saying. So one might object to FS4, saying that after the rewiring, JoJo is one person with two bodies. This means that JoJo is one person with 4 eyes, 2 heads, 4 arms, 4 legs. And 2 of those eyes are currently looking up at the ceiling, and 2 of those eyes are currently looking around at the street. So the idea is that we don't have a single thing with conflicting properties, which then allows someone to deny FS4, insisting that Chad RW and Alex RW are actually the same person, namely JoJo. But this would be a really weird way of understanding this case. And it can't be right. For the same reasons that, think back to the Conjoined Twins case. The same reason that Abby and Brittany are not the same person. So let's suppose that Chad RW goes on to marry Amir, and Amir then kisses Alex RW without Chad RW's consent. And then and then kills Chad RW so he can be with Alex RW. If Chad RW and Alex RW are the same person, then Amir is not cheating on Chad RW since he was kissing Chad RW, aka Alex RW. And Amir didn't kill anyone since Chad RW is Alex RW and Chad RW is still alive. All Amir did, according to this interpretation of the case, is he destroyed one of Chad RW's 2 bodies. But that definitely seems like the wrong way of understanding this case. Clearly, Amir cheated on Alex RW, and the state would be justified in charging Amir with the murder of Chad RW. Clearly, FS4 seems true. Chad RW and Alex RW are not the same person. So now, there might be an account that you think that we've overlooked here. You might think that what it is for one person to be the same as another person at a later time is that they have the same soul. So we can call this the same soul account of personal identity. A at T is the same person as B at T star, if and only if A has the same soul as B. In accordance with this view, Brittany and Abby are going to be different people because they have different souls. The conscious and the unconscious man on the island are going to be the same person because they have the same soul. And male T and male W in the body swap case are not going to be the same person because Raul's soul was taken out of male T and it was put into female W. But really, this account is just going to push the bump in the rug. Now I want to know, well, what is a soul? So if you're talking about souls, you probably have some religious connotation in mind. You're probably thinking about something immaterial that comes apart from your body when you die. And if you've behaved well, then your soul will go on to heaven. But this really just seems like a roundabout way of talking about you. If your soul goes to heaven, then surely you are what is also going to heaven. The soul account seems to be signaling that you think that there's some immaterial thing that merely inhabits your body but is not actually identical to your body. So if this is what you mean by soul, then it doesn't really answer the question about what personal identity is. If A has the same soul, if A's soul is just another way of referring to A, then all the same soul account is going to tell us that A is the same person as B, if and only if A is the same person as B. Well, if that's true, then that's just going to be completely uninformative. So let's think about if we were to ask, like, what makes someone a bachelor? Well, what makes someone a bachelor, if we were to just say is that they are a bachelor, then that's not really telling us anything. That's not a good account of what makes someone a bachelor. So now, this view really isn't going to be able to explain much of the cases. It's just saying that Abby and Brittany are different people because they're different people. The man on the island is the same person before and after the blackout because he's the same person. It's not really telling us anything. And now this account is also going to have particular trouble with the double trouble case. The same soul account is going to tell us that JoJo is Chad RW or Alex RW, depending on which one of them got her soul. In other words, JoJo is Chad RW or Alex RW, depending on which one is JoJo. So maybe another way of understanding the same soul account is that your soul is some immaterial part of your body, but it's just a part of your body. Then we also, another part of us is our bodies. So this can explain Abby and Brittany. They are different people in virtue of failing to share some immaterial part. That immaterial part, the soul, is what you're able to use to distinguish between Abby and Brittany. But this account, or this way of understanding the souls, is going to have trouble with the other cases. Even if you think that JoJo and her soul are two different things, how could you determine which one her soul went into, Chad RW or Alex RW's body? With the other accounts, we can check, we can reflect, we can say, oh, is one a psychological descendant of the other? Or we can say, oh, does one have the same body as the other? But there's no way of telling which one of them actually has the soul. So there's no way of actually knowing, like, how does someone persist over time? So further, if the soul does really come apart from the body, then there's nothing wrong with thinking that that soul could go on to inhabit other bodies. So suppose that your soul once inhabited the body of Florence Nightingale. You don't look like her, you don't act like her, you don't inherit any of her persona or memories, but it's your soul was the same immaterial part of you, was also an immaterial part of Florence Nightingale. But that would be really strange to conclude that means that you are Florence Nightingale. Technically, all of your atoms that make up your body right now, they were dispersed over the last couple hundred years, and those atoms happen to be the exact same thing that made up another person before, let's say Florence Nightingale again. But just because those atoms made up someone else doesn't mean that you are identical to that other person. Same thing's happening here with your soul. Just because your soul was previously inhabited another body doesn't mean that you are that same person. Hence, the same soul account doesn't really seem to be any kind of improvement here on either the physical accounts or the psychological accounts. And so that's why we really weren't considering it, and it should be rejected. So neither the psychological nor the physical accounts are going to be giving us an adequate answer to personal identity. Maybe that's because both these approaches are too narrow. Maybe we should be looking for something more like a hybrid account. So what's considered two hybrid accounts? These are going to be combining some sort of physical and or psychological features in order to try and answer questions about personal identity. So there's going to be two such accounts we can consider: the body and mind account, or the body or mind account. So first we have the body and mind account. A at T is the same person as B at T star if and only if A has the same body as B and A is a psychological descendant or ancestor of B. The body or mind account says that A at T is the same person as B at T star if and only if A has the same body as B or A is a psychological ancestor or descendant of B. So let's start with the mind-body account. And let's see how it handles the cases we've been considering. So the conjoined twin case, it's going to get that correct. It's going to say that Abby and Brittany are different people. And it's because Abby is not a psychological descendant of Brittany and vice versa. Now with the double trouble case, it's also going to get that correct because it's going to say JoJo is not numerically identical with two people. And that's going to be because JoJo does not share a body with either of them. But this account cannot explain total blackout. The unconscious man is not a psychological descendant of anyone. So even though they share the same body, the unconscious man and the conscious man are not going to be the same person. Nor can this account explain what happens in the body swap case. Female W is a psychological descendant of male T, but they are not going to be the same person on this account because they do not have the same body. So now, what about the mind or body account? Well, the results are actually going to be flipped. So this account can explain what's happening in the total blackout case. And saying the man in the total blackout case is going to be the same person as the conscious and the unconscious man are going to be the same person because they have the same body. And it's also going to give us the correct answer in the body swap case because female W is a psychological descendant of male T, and so that's going to say they're the same person. But it's not going to be able to explain what happens in the fission case, and it's not going to be able to explain what's happening in the conjoined twin case. According to this account, JoJo is identical to two distinct people, and Abby and Brittany are going to be the same person. So it probably shouldn't be a surprise to you that these accounts aren't going to work. These hybrid accounts aren't going to be any good. So the mind and body account says that sameness of body and psychological ancestry are both necessary for personal identity. But the body swap and total blackout show us that neither are necessary. And the mind or body account says sameness of body or psychological relation is going to be sufficient for personal identity, but the conjoined twin case and double trouble show us that neither are going to be sufficient. So yeah, it really shouldn't be a big surprise that these hybrid accounts are not going to give us a good answer about personal identity. So neither the physical features nor the psychological features nor your soul are going to give us a clear account of personal identity. You might not think that this is a really important question, but there are actually some other questions that you probably think are important, and those are going to rely on personal identity. So like, does life begin at conception? In other words, are you identical to the zygote that was in your mother's womb? Is the brain dead person in the hospital bed the same person that used to love running and playing, or is that person now gone? What about like a person who has like a complete personality change after an accident? Is that person still obligated to all of the same things that their, previous self did and, signed them up for? So maybe our consciousness could also be like uploaded to the cloud someday. But if we did that, is that actually still the same person, or is that just an artificial version of that person? And so these are just some of the questions that are going to be really, really hard to answer without a clear account of personal identity. All right, now the last chance for you to stop and reflect before you go. In the last segment, we considered two different hybrid accounts of personal identity and raised problems for both. Can you articulate a superior account that avoids some of these problems?